right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, it feels like 2016 all over again. Now, I don't mean that in a way in which we might be missing something about Trump's chances of the polls, although it's probably true, but more in how the establishment GOP is handling him as a candidate now that they think he's certain to lose. And of course, last time around, they were all wrong and they had egg on their face. And while Trump made a few certain players pay a price for denouncing him in October 2016, by and large, he mostly let them rule Washington during his presidency, resulting in a much more likely defeat this time around. Which brings us to where we are right now. Trump is down on the ropes, and the vipers in the establishment GOP want to blame him and him alone for his loss. Now, they see him not as a potential avenue towards future electoral salvation, but as the main reason that they're in this predicament in the first place. They're jumping ship, but for exactly the wrong reasons. And as I've said here before, why you think Trump lost is just as important as a potential loss itself. It drives all of your future decision making. And it gives zero pleasure for me to tell you that this is a hellish preview of what the next several years of the Republican Party are going to look like, at least until the 2023 GOP primary. The leader of the group is, of course, Republican Senator Ben Sasse, one of the philosopher kings of the Never Trump movement, and Conservatism Inc., who let loose on the president in a public question and answer town hall with his constituents. Let's take a listen to some snippets of that conversation.
It isn't just that he fails to lead our allies, it's that the United States now regularly sells out our allies under his leadership. The way he treats women and spends like a drunken sailor, the ways I criticize President Obama for that kind of spending, I've criticized President Trump for as well. At the beginning of the COVID crisis, he refused to treat it seriously for months. He treated it like a news cycle by news cycle PR crisis rather than a multi-year public health challenge, which is what it is. And now, I mean, in his partial defense here, I think that lots of the news media has pretended that COVID is literally the first public health crisis ever, and somehow it's Donald Trump's fault. That's not true. They just wanted to use it against him. But the reality is that he careened from curb to curb. First, he ignored COVID, and then he went into full economic shutdown mode. He was the one who said 10 to 14 days of shutdown would fix this, and that was always wrong.
So there you have it, folks. I'm sure some of you agree with Sasse's criticisms of Trump on specific things, but look, at the core of his objection, it's that he dislikes Trump personally, and on policy, his chief disagreement is that he spent too much money. Yes, too much in the middle of the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression. On COVID, he smacks him for not taking it seriously enough, fair, but then he hits him for supposedly being the driver of economic shutdowns in the worst days. This is fundamentally a libertarian critique of Trump, which has no bearing in electoral reality. As I have covered here ad nauseum, literally the most popular things that Trump could have done in the last year is pursue massive economic stimulus many times over, take the virus much more seriously in the beginning, while ensuring that not a single person goes bankrupt or destitute as a result of any sort of social restrictions. He'd be cruising to re-election if he was doing any of that. And yet, Ben Sasse is upset with Trump for even going in that direction. That's how deranged these people are. And it's not just him. It's the quiet part out loud that many establishment Republicans have long believed and are now just saying out loud because they think he's going to lose. Take a look at John Cornyn from my home state of Texas, who is cruising to re-election in the United States Senate. Cornyn told the Fort Worth Star-Telegram his relationship with Trump is, quote, maybe like a lot of women who get married and they think they're going to change their spouse, and that doesn't usually work out very well. Wow. So what exactly did he want to change Trump's mind on? Well, Cornyn told the Star-Telegram he has repeatedly expressed concerns about the debt and deficits to Secretary Mnuchin on recent stimulus talks, and he believes the president has been too cavalier in spending. What else does Cornyn disagree with Trump on? Well, the list is quite a doozy. The Star-Telegram notes that he was very upset that Trump pulled out of TPP and that Trump tried to fulfill his signature campaign promise to build a wall on the southern border. So in other words, John Cornyn dislikes Trump for straying from GOP orthodoxy on deficits, trade, and immigration, the three issues more than any other that he became the GOP nominee and eventually president of the United States. It's just incredible to see so many of these people just say it. Because for every loudmouth like John Cornyn or Ben Sasse, there is your median Republican senator which harbors all of these same complaints but doesn't feel secure enough to say it out loud. Which means that when Trump is gone, they'll simply revert to the mean. In fact, I think I can sum up the future of the GOP in a Ted Cruz appearance from a few months back.
Well, I am a conservative, an unabashed conservative. I'm also a populist. I'm deeply a populist, and I also have deep libertarian principles. And look, if you're protecting liberty, that is the foundation of our country. That is the foundation of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. When it comes to populism, I think the most fundamental and important shift in the last decade in politics is that Republicans have become the party of the working class.
Cruz almost seems like he's watching Rising. But the truth is, he just knows the right script. On policy, he hasn't budged 1 inch. Cruz is still out there opposing a stimulus bill. Probably agrees with John Cornyn on trade. And before the 2016 election, there was no evidence that he was really all that serious of an immigration hawk. So every one of the future GOP politicians will say the words working class a lot. But on a policy level, they will change absolutely nothing. We have covered the stimulus earlier in the show, but I'll end on it because it really is the perfect barometer for whether you're for the people or not. And it is becoming eminently clear that as much of a bad faith actor that Nancy Pelosi is, that the Senate GOP is truly the beating heart and soul of the establishment GOP, has not budged at all on this crisis. Mitch McConnell, despite everything that has happened, despite the White House negotiations, despite the economic destruction that's wrought on our country, is committing only to putting a $500 billion bill on the Senate floor. A bill which includes no stimulus checks, a modest increase in unemployment, nothing for so many millions and millions who have done their patriotic duty, stayed home, and been abandoned by their government. That tells you everything you need to know about what the GOP does when they're unmoored from Trump. And it tells that these people truly believe that the biggest problem with Trump are actually all of the only good things that he's tried to do in office. It doesn't bear well for the country, and especially does not bode well for the future of the grand old party. I mean, it's kind of incredible, right, Crystal, whenever you listen to those Ben Sass critiques, because you can, it's like a mixture of an MSNBC monologue with like deficit hawkery.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? You're like, he's like, mistreats women. I'm like, oh, okay, I could see that. This, I'm like, yeah, that's reasonable. And then he's like, but spends like a drunken sailor. And I'm
like
like,
a drunken sailor.
Like, there it is. That is the core critique.
Millions of Americans on unemployment with no help in sight beg to disagree about the spending like a drunken sailor. And frankly, look, the way he ran in 2016 was the polar opposite of I'm just going to go along with GOP orthodoxy and everything. And that's
he called them out as corrupt.
That's what people really liked about him. People love to see when you're willing to call out your own team as much as the other side. And yet when he got into office, I think the only issue that he really actually ideologically cared about was trade.
Yes.
That's the only area where you can say, okay, on certain things, he actually followed through, he did the tariffs, he did the trade war, and they all kicked and screamed, many of them. That was like the thing that they were most vociferously opposed to. He actually did renegotiate NAFTA. I mean, to me, it wasn't a great deal, but he actually did something there. Everything else, it turned out just to be lip service. And look, it is the reason why he's about to lose in potentially massive landslide fashion and one of the least impressive candidates of all time.
Literally.
If he had bucked party orthodoxy and really forced them and brought them along, which he could have done because he has so much pull with the base, he would be in a much different position today. I always think about, if you go back to the very early days of his presidency, if he had come out first and foremost with a massive infrastructure package, putting projects in almost every district across the country, Democrats would have worked. Look at what
they had to.
Yeah. They would have had to have worked with him on that, and that would have set a completely different tone for the entire administration. If he had made Republicans pay who went against him on this thing, on other spending priorities, totally different administration. But ultimately, look, I mean, these people, first of all, they're ideological. They've been brainwashed into these beliefs. Second of all, they're responding to the organized libertarian, elite libertarian donor class.
Yes.
And so they're always going to revert back to the norm. It's hard to pull them out of that, and you really have to forcefully do it. And so ultimately, I do lay the blame at the feet of Trump because he just didn't care that much to do it. He didn't actually care about these issues. He didn't actually push to get through a heterodox economic agenda that would help working class people. And so, the disaster that's unfolded really lies primarily at his feet because these people are never going to change.
I blame him too. And look, actually, they could have changed because the one thing that they all want, maybe more than all of that, is to get elected. And that's the thing. Ben Sasse came groveling to the White House for that endorsement whenever Trump, tweeted his endorsement of him back in October 2019, whenever he was facing a primary challenge from the right? So Sasse has little hands out, grubby little hands for his endorsement whenever it's time to win. But now that he's won his primary, cruising to re-election in the state of Nebraska, now it's gloves are off. It's the same thing over and over again. If the same thing had happened to John Cornyn, if Cornyn had been talking smack about Trump and all that, and Trump had endorsed his opponent, Cornyn is toast. And we all know it. It's the same thing. What Trump could have done is if he tied his personal dynamism and love with the base to any sort of policy priority, these people would never say any of this stuff out loud. They would have all voted for any stimulus package. They'd do anything he wants. But because he hasn't done that, they're bucking him. I mean, and a lot of people don't get this. He might be personally unpopular with a lot of people, but with the Republican base, he is the most beloved president ever, modern history, with the Republican Party. More than HW, more than W, more than John McCain, any of these people. And like a 96% approval rating, because they feel that he at least fights for something. You can use that to your advantage, especially against these senators. But they've decided that he won't do it because they've bucked him time after time after time, and they know they're not going to pay any price. And Sasse, of course, he's willing to go out and say the quietest part out loud.
Right.
But he's just saying what they all think.
Right. And, the way he did this was very interesting. He didn't go to like a mainstream press outlet, but he let loose on this like constituents Q&A town hall. It was actually funny because the way it was initially reported was like in private. It was like, no, this wasn't private.
No,
he was talking to his constituents.
Yeah.
The timing of this is not an accident.
Oh, I'm sure he leaked it.
They can all read the polls. They can all see what's going on here. And they're jockeying to create the narrative that is very self-serving for them about exactly what happened. And I think you're totally right. They're going to learn the polar opposite of the right language, which is that he spent like a drunken sailor, versus that when it came to any kind of economic populism that really could have benefited the working class, he was completely absent and never put the screws to these people to actually get something done. I think it was Rostow that pointed out that where right-wing populists have succeeded, it's because they have moved their party on economic orthodoxy. And that's the one thing that he never was able to do.
He certainly wasn't. All right, Crystal, I'm looking forward to your radar next.